Welcome to the Fantasy's finest fantasy football podcast. Here are your hosts, William Spencer, Jalen McQueen, and Mark Carter.
What's going on? Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Fantasy's finest podcast. I know I've been away for a bit, but it's time to get back to business because we are deep into redraft season. So I got to get you guys squared away, getting you guys ready to go into your leagues, knowing what you need to do, and knowing how you need to draft so you can come out and be the champions of your home leagues this season. So in this episode, we'll be going over some headlines from the preseason games, from NFL training camps, just a few tidbits to help you try and find some more assets in your fantasy drafts. You know, we got to talk about some things that are going on in the news. You know, we got to get that stuff. There's some injuries that have happened, some new additions, some promotions. So we got plenty to talk about in this episode. So before we get into that, make sure that you're following the podcast on your favorite podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, and Audacity. You know, we're doing the video thing this season, so you can catch us on all the YouTube channels, the Fantasy's Finest on YouTube, and make sure that you're following the fantasysfinest.com for the latest articles coming out for the NFL season, for the 2024 NFL season. So, without further ado, let's get into the news. We got to talk about that first because there's been some headlines coming out of the preseason games, coming out of training camp. So we got to talk about those first. And then let's get into the nitty gritty of the episode. Let's get into the headlines. So first, news and notes from around the NFL.
News and notes from around the NFL.
All right, coming up first, we got to talk about some of the injuries that have happened in the NFL. Some a little bit older, some a little bit new, but you still got to be aware of these things because these can impact how you draft or what players that you're looking to take on. So let's get into it. First up, we got Lions running back Jahmyr Gibbs. He suffered a hamstring injury. There's probably some more recent news about that. They are taking it easy on him. More recent reports have stated that they're going to take it easy on him going the rest of the way through training camp. They want to make sure that he's ready for week 1. Vikings rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy he's already undergone surgery for a torn meniscus. He is out for the season. He will not be there for the 2024 season. It's unfortunate because, you know, he doesn't really get to do his rookie season. He won't be able to play. I'm not going to lie, I think there was some belief that he could possibly start this season because, you know, how confident are we in Sam Darnold making it through the whole season? So it was some hope that J.J. McCarthy would be able to be on the field in 2024. Unfortunately, this is not the case. He will be out for the entire 2024 season. And Sam Darnold is looking to be your guy. So, that's great news. Packers rookie running back Marshawn Lloyd, he was also dealing with a hamstring. There's no timetable for his return, or at least that was the latest report. He went down during the Packers preseason game. Chiefs wide receiver Marquise Brown, he got injured in the first preseason game he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks behind a shoulder injury. It's a similar injury that Tyreek Hill suffered when he was with the Chiefs. And he's expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. That's heading into the season, so you might want to make some adjustments to your draft if you were targeting Hollywood Brown in your fantasy leagues or your fantasy drafts coming up. Chargers just got back Justin Herbert. He was dealing with a toe injury, recently returned to practice after being out since August 1st. So there's a positive. We also got some contract news. The Bengals wide receiver Jamar Chase and Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb are still not participating in practice. Jamar Chase is holding in while CeeDee Lamb is away from the team. He's still away from the team as both wide receivers look to get a new contract heading into the 2024 season. Now, one thing that is bothering me about this situation is that these two wide receivers are the best guys, the best offensive weapons in their respective offenses. How their teams, their front offices have not figured out how to get these guys paid and back in camp or participating in camp is beyond me. We know what the market is with Justin Jefferson's contract coming down to $35 million a year. we know where the bar is. So whether you want to jump over that bar or get as close to it as you possibly can, those are your only options. Hemming and hawing and trying to finagle your way into some kind of discount, we're beyond that point already. So you might as well get these guys paid, get them in camp, get them participating in camp, so you can hopefully have a great season. As far as Rashee Rice is concerned about his season, apparently the NFL has not interviewed him after his fiasco, the car crash incident that happened earlier this offseason. Reports have stated that the Chiefs wide receiver Rashee Rice has not been interviewed by the NFL at all, which is surprising, but his case is ongoing. Even as we speak, he's facing 8 felony charges, and his case is reportedly still pending, and at this rate, it's looking like he might not be suspended for the 2024 season. So if you're targeting Rashee Rice, that's the latest news. We don't know whether or not his case is going to, or a trial date is going to be set for his case as of yet. So right now, he's not looking to be suspended, and the NFL has said that there's still ongoing investigations in regards to Rashee Rice's case, and that they're going to let the justice system work its way through Rashee Rice's situation. So that's, interesting, because had he been a Cowboy or he had a star on his helmet, they would have suspended him before he got out of the car. But, that's another story for another time. And finally, the Commanders have named Jaden Daniels the starting quarterback for the Washington Commanders. Kind of a no-brainer, but it's still good news. At least there's something positive to report. So we got all that stuff out of the way. The news is done. Now let's get into the main topic, whatever you want to call it. We're getting into the main subject of today's podcast. Let's get into it. Training camp notes, preseason notes. Let's talk about it.
And now for our feature presentation.
All right, so one area, there have been a couple of topics that I've been looking over, some headlines that have caught my attention. And the reason being is because while their situations aren't always all great going into the 2024 season, they can still possibly lead, or these players can still possibly lead some fantasy production on a well-built team. So it's better to go over them and have options as opposed to completely ignoring them. Now, I could give you my own personal biases or my own personal thoughts on how I would do it, but the more information a fantasy manager is armed with heading into his draft, the better he'll be able, or they'll be able to make decisions as opposed to who they want to add to their fantasy team. So let's get into some of the headlines I've been watching. And one in particular is the Denver Broncos running back situation, because they have a few guys back there that could potentially lead off into the 2024 season as the top option. And one running back in particular was Javonte Williams, who's been rumored, at least in the beginning of the offseason and training camp, as a potential cut candidate. But with his production in training camp being in a more positive light, as well as his performance in the preseason game so far, is looking like Javonte Williams will be hanging around for the Denver Broncos. And that's a good thing, because you have Javonte Williams, you have the recently drafted Audric Estime, you have Samaje Perine, who was there from last season, and then you have Jaleel McLaughlin, who's also been producing. And right now, what it looks like, especially with Sean Payton's system, how he likes to use 2 running backs in his system, is looking like Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin, because I want to make sure I say his name right. Those 2 running backs could be your 1A, 1B type running backs, especially when you see how tripping over his name, Sean Payton likes to use his running backs, kind of reminiscent of the Mark Andrews, Alvin Kamara days with the New Orleans Saints. So that's a positive. If Javonte Williams does lock down that role, he still should have a substantial role in that offense. Now, how good the offense is going to be for the 2024 season, kind of up in the air, but at least it's still an option. At least it's still a positive option for finding a lead back that you could probably get later on in the draft. It's still an option to have for fantasy managers. Another guy that I really have been watching hard this offseason, is Saints wide receiver A.T. Perry. Now he's looking to lock down that wide receiver 3 role. And some might not know who he is, and that's perfect because he could be one of the biggest sleepers this fantasy season because he's in a system or he's taking over. He could be, let me say this right. He could potentially be taking over a role that could yield a lot of volume. And the reason being is because Mike Thomas was released earlier this offseason. They don't really have a big target. Jawan Johnson is still dealing with injuries. I believe he's still on the PUP list. I'll try and fact check that, but he's going to be out, and he's one of their biggest bodies on the offensive side of the ball. You still have Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, but Shaheed is a little bit smaller, so having a big body target who can play downfield and be a big weapon or potentially be a big weapon for the season, then A.T. Perry would go a long way. Clint Kubiak, I'm probably butchering his name too. Clint Kubiak is going to be the offensive coordinator for the Saints this season. So you've seen how you kind of get a glimpse of how he likes to run his offenses when you look at how he was the offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings back in 2021. If Perry can be that wide receiver, maybe he locks down the wide receiver 3 role, but maybe he sees an increased snap share as an option, a bigger target for Derek Carr this season in those 2 wide receiver sets, maybe. And Shaheed comes out in the wide receiver 3 sets as that burner deep threat that he was known for last season. That would be a big positive for a guy that you can get for the free at the end of your fantasy drafts. A.T. Perry is not being drafted right now. He's probably not even a household name in fantasy circles, but he has the potential to be a big asset for the Saints in 2024, especially when you consider the amount of work that Mike Thomas was getting before he left. He was on pace before he got injured and he was lost for the season, on pace for over 130 targets in that offense last year. That's a pretty substantial margin, especially when you consider you have a great wide receiver on the other end like Chris Olave. So getting A.T. Perry and finding that value at the end of your drafts, hey man, it's nothing like finding those gems at the end of the draft, man. Trust me. But having that in your back pocket might be able to help. And it's a low risk, high reward system because, like I said, you're not having to spend a top draft pick for A.T. Perry this fantasy season, and you likely won't because he's going to be the wide receiver 3. We just hope that he's having an expanded role based off of the fact that the wide receivers for the Saints, they're not big guys. So you need a big body target. You don't have your tight end. You may not have your tight end in the beginning of the season too. So having that big body wide receiver, especially in the red zone, might be able to pay dividends for getting somebody who's dirt cheap. You can, if you plan your draft right, you can get a stash with that kind of caliber or that kind of upside for the free. It's worth taking the risk. Now, another team that I've been looking at this offseason is the Chicago Bears backfield. Khalil Herbert is there. The Bears went out and signed DeAndre Swift this offseason. They still have Rashawn Johnson, who they drafted last year. Those 3 running backs are looking to vie for those top 2 spots. Now, there were reports that Khalil Herbert could have been a cut candidate this offseason, but it's looking like he's been putting together a substantial camp and preseason work this offseason, which is making it, or it seems like it's making it a hard decision for the Bears front office, their coaching staff, to maybe axe one of these guys. Now, like I said, DeAndre Swift signed a 2-year deal during free agency, so he's likely to be the lead guy. I'm praying that they don't run a committee. I don't want to see a committee in 2024 out of Chicago. I would preferably like DeAndre Swift to be the lead guy and Rashawn Johnson to be that split back situation. I want to see something that's kind of like the Detroit Lions and how they ran Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, because that fielded great fantasy production in that kind of style of running those 2 running backs or their usage in that Lions offense. I would pray for something like that. But right now, we don't know if Khalil Herbert's going to make the team, if he's going to stay on with the Chicago Bears, if the Bears are going to keep 3 running backs, or if they're going to keep 2 top-end running backs and have some other guys fill in and make the roster as depth pieces. So I'm looking to see how that situation shakes out. So as it stands, I do like DeAndre Swift. We're going to talk about specifics. DeAndre Swift is very versatile. He can be used all over the field. He can catch out of the backfield. He's one of the more elusive running backs, in my opinion, in that backfield right now. But I love Rashawn Johnson because you can get him at a cheaper price. He's a thumper. He can catch out of the backfield, and he's good on third downs and pass protection, an area which Khalil Herbert struggled in. Now, that's probably what's going to be the deciding factor as opposed to who's going to be able to get those reps or those lead role reps heading into 2024. So we'll have to see how that shakes out. But I'm really hoping to see some Rashawn Johnson this season with DeAndre Swift, those 2 pieces being more interchangeable in that offense over Khalil Herbert. Because if he gets cut, he could probably land somewhere else where they need a running back. But right now, I need to see that shake out that way. I would love to be able to get and play Rashawn Johnson this season because I really believe in that talent, especially coming out of Texas, playing behind Bijan Robinson. But that's what I really want to see. Hopefully that happens that way. But if it doesn't, if you want to deal with picking players from a committee and there's a 3-headed monster, that's probably an area that I'm going to be staying away from. Now, another potential sleeper is Jalen Tolbert from the Dallas Cowboys. Now, he's been having an exceptional camp this year. He's been playing very well. He's been getting more reps because of the CeeDee Lamb contract situation and Lamb not being there. So it's really been Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert. And Brandon Cooks is already going to see a substantial role as the wide receiver too, heading into the season. But Jalen Tolbert could be that unsung hero for both the Dallas Cowboys and fantasy managers. And again, he's low risk, high reward. He's not being drafted at high. He's probably not being drafted until after round 10 or 11. So you could take the dart throw and take a shot and see how it goes. But if you're reading up on the Cowboys camp, Jalen Tolbert has been fantastic this offseason. And that's something that they needed because they haven't really had a number 3 wide receiver. They had Michael Gallup before. He was coming back from injuries. He just wasn't himself. And even he said that if Jalen Tolbert keeps up his pace at the way he was going to end up replacing Michael Gallup. So now's the time to see if not Michael Gallup, but if Jalen Tolbert can ascend to that next level and take on that role because the Cowboys offense has one of the best passing offenses in the league, despite perceptions of how you may feel about Dak Prescott. But the fact is, the Cowboys have one of the best passing offenses and the best offenses in the league, bar none. They're one of the best scoring offenses in the league, and that presents an opportunity for Jalen Tolbert to be an asset for both the Cowboys and potentially fantasy managers this season. It all depends on how much work they're going to be able to give Jalen Tolbert in that offense. But he's worth the dart throw. He's not being drafted high. So there's another option for you just in case you want to take a chance on another late round target or late round wide receiver if you find yourself struggling to look for an option, just because it happens to the best of us. But having options on the table is always a positive. And finally, we'll wrap up the episode with this one. Are we or should we be pumping the brakes on Trey Benson? Now, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you because I was definitely nervous heading into that first preseason game. I believe it was against the Saints. And it looked like Trey Benson was a little sluggish. Reports coming out of camp was that he was having a time getting his feet under him during training camp. He was behind on the depth chart. He was behind, I can't even remember that guy's name. He's Americado. I'm sorry if I'm butchering his name, but he was behind Michael Carter, and Americado on the depth chart. He was the running back 4. But he was able to get his feet under him. He produced in the second preseason game against the Colts. He looked more fresh. He looked more focused. He ripped off some big runs, 19-yard runs, 20-yard runs in that game before he was eventually yanked. Americado had a shoulder injury before last week, before that game, for that preseason game against the Colts. And it looks like Trey Benson could be turning a corner. And Trey Benson's more of a stash this season. James Conner's going to be the lead running back for the Arizona Cardinals this season. But we know he has a history of being injured since his Pittsburgh Steelers days. So while he does produce at a high fantasy level for fantasy managers, he's done it since he's gotten over to Arizona. He had a nice little stint in Pittsburgh before he eventually left. But James Conner, Trey Benson could be that heir apparent to James Conner and the Arizona Cardinals backfield. And that's what we're hoping happens. If it does happen this season, it would be great, because then you would get that fresh young running back that you would probably stash or target to stash. If you have maybe James Conner, you could probably plug Trey Benson in as a handcuff. Or if you're looking to stash a guy in the event that James Conner does go down this season, you're already one step ahead of the game. So Trey Benson is more likely going to be that handcuff stash type of player. You're not really getting him to be a running back 3 or a flex option in your fantasy leagues, because James Conner is still there. And as long as James Conner is healthy, he's going to see that lion's share of that work. But we're watching to see if Trey Benson can even be that heir apparent, that replacement for James Conner, because he's not getting any younger. And I believe he's on the last year of his deal before he's a free agent next season. So that's something to watch too. In dynasty formats, you're definitely taking a shot at taking Trey Benson, likely in the second round of your rookie drafts. If you're going back that far, probably in the early part of the second round, maybe a late first rounder at earliest. But Trey Benson is a guy who's going to be that handcuff, or hopefully being that handcuff for James Conner in 2024, and hopefully a stash with the eventuality of him becoming that new running back 1 for fantasy managers moving forward. But that will do it for the podcast. That will be doing it for this episode. So thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure, like I said, you're checking out the podcast across all your favorite podcasts, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or Audacity, just for examples. You can also follow us at Fantasy's Finest. You can follow me at hype_finest if you should choose to. I'm a good follow on Twitter, a little entertaining, a little trash talk here and there, but I love talking fantasy football, and I love the engagement that I get from social media, being able to talk fantasy football with you guys. So you can also check out the website, fantasysfinest.com. We're doing articles, and I'm actually doing some more writing and contributing work for fantasydata.com as well. So you can check out my articles and stuff over there too. And give us a follow on your favorite social media accounts. Like I said, we're on Twitter, we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube. So wherever you get your fantasy fix and your favorite social medias, you can check us out there at Fantasy's Finest. But that will do it for this episode. Thank you for checking in. And we will be getting back to the grind. It's redraft season, baby. We got to get you guys right. Thanks for checking us out. We'll see you on our next episode. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy's Finest podcast. Be sure to join the community on Facebook and follow us on Twitter too at the Fantasy's Finest. See you next episode.